On a rain-slicked Tuesday night in New York City, the streets shone like black glass under the downpour, every puddle trembling beneath the red and yellow smear of traffic lights. The storm hammered umbrellas until they turned inside out, rattled gutters like tin drums, and painted the Upper East Side in a sheen of silver misery. Inside the velvet-draped walls of the Gilded Spoon, however, the weather might as well have belonged to another planet. The Gilded Spoon wasn't a place for the new money crowd who broadcast their wealth on glowing screens. No, this restaurant was a sanctuary for the old guard, a relic that clung stubbornly to its own rituals. Its patrons were the kind of people whose surnames sat on the brass plaques of university libraries, the sort who donated wings to hospitals instead of selfies to the internet. Here, the chandeliers hung heavy with crystal teardrops. The carpets muted the thunder of footsteps, and the air carried the comfortable weight of roasted duck, aged scotch, and money so ancient it had forgotten how to shout. Into this carefully curated hush moved a waitress named Ara Vance. At a glance, she was unremarkable. Black uniform pressed, hair neatly tied back, face plain and unreadable. That plainness was her armor. At 27, she had perfected the art of invisibility. She poured water before glasses were half empty, gathered plates at the exact angle of a fork's surrender, and read the rhythm of a table as if she'd written the music herself. Her silence wasn't shyness. It was camouflage. The regulars knew her only as part of the furniture, as essential yet forgettable as the polished silverware. But Ara's eyes were always working. She didn't just see patrons, she cataloged them. Mr. Abernathy in booth fiddled with his wedding band whenever he lied to his dinner companion. The Sinclairs, by the window, placed their wine glasses a deliberate inch apart, announcing a pending divorce without speaking a word. Ara read them all. The small betrayals, the desperate signals, the tremors beneath their cultivated calm. This wasn't hospitality school training. It was survival, carried forward from a life she'd buried deep. Around her neck, tucked beneath her blouse, hung a silver locket worn smooth from years of nervous touch. It was the single relic of that other life, a promise clutched so tightly it had become bone deep. She would never again be a victim. At precisely 8:15, the heavy oak door opened and the room tilted with it. Julian Croft had arrived. The conversations wavered, forks paused midair. Even the waitstaff straightened their shoulders. Croft wasn't just another rich man. He was a gravitational force disguised in a tailored charcoal suit. As CEO of Croft Enterprises, his reach stretched from aerospace to private security, the kind of empire that made small countries seem expendable. He could shift markets with a sigh, bend senators with a phone call. Tall, broad, impeccably dressed, yet behind those ice-blue eyes lived a weariness money couldn't bleach away. He came without guards, a habit that always puzzled staff. No entourage, no shadows but his own. Only on the second Tuesday of every month, always the same ritual, a private dinner at Booth 7. His late wife's favorite corner. Ara knew this not from gossip, but from the soft flicker in his eyes whenever he glanced at the empty chair across from him. Grief had its own language, and she was fluent. "Your usual table, Mr. Croft," said Antoine, the maitre d', his voice carrying the tired grace of a retired diplomat. He bowed slightly, guiding Croft to Booth 7, the alcove curtained from curious eyes. Ara approached with her notepad. "Good evening, Mr. Croft. Can I get you something to start?" Her voice was steady, professional, the tone of someone trained to disappear behind her words. Without lifting his gaze from the menu he never needed, he murmured, "McAllen? 25. Neat." His baritone carried command the way thunder carries rain. She nodded, turned to go, when his voice softened unexpectedly. "Miss Vance." Her step faltered. Rarely did he use her name. She turned, meeting those piercing eyes, eyes that stripped men bare in boardrooms. "Is the Coq au vin as good as the last month?" It wasn't a casual question. It was a test. Was the chef still the same? The standard still immaculate? The world still as orderly as he demanded it be? "Chef Dubois is in fine form tonight, sir," she replied evenly. "I believe it will exceed expectations." For the briefest second, approval flickered across his face. Almost a smile, gone as quickly as it came. Ara walked to the bar, balancing the weight of his question against the prickle at the base of her neck. Something about tonight hummed wrong, like a violin just slightly off-key. She told herself it was the storm, that constant press of Manhattan's tension bleeding through the walls. She was wrong. At the bar's mirror, amid the glitter of bottles, her reflection stared back. Bland, unassuming, a mask so well worn it felt natural. No one looking at that face could imagine what her hands had once been trained to do. The locket burned cold against her skin, whispering of vows forged in grief. She had promised herself she would always see the storm coming. She hadn't counted on the hurricane already at the door. At 8:43, the bell above the entrance gave a discordant clang, sharp enough to snap the room's spine. 5 men entered, not together, but staggered, their movements orchestrated with unnerving grace. The first 2 were slick in dark suits, their tailoring too functional for this place. One drifted toward the entrance, scanning angles. The other ghosted toward the hallway near the restrooms, eyes sweeping like radar. Antoine moved to greet them, but a subtle shake of the first man's head froze him mid-gesture. This was not a dinner reservation. It was an occupation. The next pair were heavier, their shoulders stretching fabric, the bulge of armor visible beneath. Guns pressed discreet, outlines against their jackets. One planted himself near the bar, back to the wall, gaze sweeping with mechanical precision. The other cut off the kitchen, the staff's lifelines severed in silence. The air shifted from warmth to frost. Forks halted. Voices died mid-sentence. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim. Fear, invisible but palpable, thickened the room until every breath felt weighted. Ara stood behind the bar, polishing a glass with slow, steady strokes. Her face didn't change. Her mind roared. This wasn't a robbery. Robbers barked, brandished, made chaos their ally. These men moved like surgeons, calm, precise, controlled. Their box formation tightened around booth 7. The last man entered, the leader. Average height, dark slicked hair, a hawk's profile cut sharp against the velvet drapes. His Italian suit screamed money, but his eyes screamed something colder. He smiled, a thin blade of a smile, and every nerve in Ara's body recognized the predator behind it. Marco Bellini. His name ran through her veins like ice water. The ghost. A man whispered about in places where contracts were signed with blood instead of ink. Specialist in extractions. Corporate persuasion's blunt instrument. Ara's hand brushed the locket, steadying her. She knew the formation, seal and box, maximum intimidation. She'd studied it once in another life. The past she had sworn to bury came clawing up through her ribs. Her pulse quickened, but her breathing slowed. Discipline over fear. Always discipline. Bellini moved toward booth 7 with the grace of a serpent. The two heavies shadowed him, walls of muscle with weapons sleeping in their hands. Julian Croft had already noticed, catching their reflection in the amber of his scotch. He didn't panic. He didn't even stiffen. He simply raised his drink, sipped slowly, and waited as the storm settled across from him. "Bellini," Croft said at last, voice rich with contempt. "I should have known Thorne would send a dog with an expensive leash." "I assume this isn't about the coq au vin." Bellini's smile widened, predatory. "Mr. Croft, always a pleasure. My employer feels our last conversation ended prematurely. He requests a more personal debriefing." He gestured lazily to the room. "I've taken steps to ensure you're focused. No distractions." One of the heavies drew a silenced pistol. He didn't point it, but the sight of it screamed louder than any bullet. A woman gasped, silverware rattled, phones on the table. Now the man at the bar growled the order. One by one, patrons obeyed, sliding their glowing lifelines into the open. The restaurant became a shrine of fear. Era's pulse thundered, but her thoughts were sharp, almost inhumanly clear. Kitchen blocked, entrance controlled. Two heavies, two scouts, one wolf in the middle. Extraction, not assassination. Croft wasn't meant to die. Not yet. The scout by the kitchen glanced at her, eyes dismissive. Just a waitress, just part of the wallpaper. The same mistake people had always made. The mistake she had built her life around. Bellini leaned toward Croft, voice soft as a knife in velvet. "We can do this the easy way, Julian, or the hard way. The hard way involves redecorating this lovely establishment with bodies. You'll come with us, and you'll bring the Phoenix Drive Croft's mask cracked, barely, but enough." Shock flickered across his eyes at the mention of the Phoenix Drive. Ara caught it. So did Bellini. "Ah," Marco purred, "so you do have it. That will save us time." He snapped his fingers. The heavies closed in. Era set the polished glass down with a deliberate click. In the silence, it was thunder. The bar enforcer glanced her way. A split second of distraction, but that was all she needed. In that heartbeat, Ara Vance ceased to be a waitress. Her shoulders squared, her spine straightened, her face hardened into a mask of focus. The camouflage peeled away to reveal the thing she had buried. A creature of precision and violence, trained in shadows. Her hand closed around the neck of a full bottle without conscious thought. Her body already knew the calculus. Nearest threat, clearest line of fire. The man at the bar. She vaulted the counter, momentum carrying her like a missile. The bottle arced, her entire weight behind it. The enforcer's hand fumbled for his weapon, too slow. The glass smashed against his skull with a dull, wet crack. He folded instantly, collapsing into a heap of muscle and silence. Gasps ripped through the dining room. Marco froze mid-motion, stunned that his clockwork plan had been unraveled by a waitress. The second heavy barked, pivoting towards her, gun rising. She kicked a bar stool into his path, a clattering obstruction that bought her the half-second she needed. She sprinted low and fast, through the kitchen doors. The gun barked behind her, the bullet splintering wood where her head had been. The storm had come inside, and Era Vance was its eye. The kitchen doors banged shut behind her, trembling on their hinges from the force of her entry. Stainless steel gleamed under harsh white lights, the sudden brightness stinging her eyes after the dim amber of the dining room. The air smelled of seared duck, garlic butter, and the copper tang of fear. Steam hissed from pots left untended, the hiss like snakes warning her not to linger. A chef, Two sous chefs and a dishwasher were huddled in the far corner, eyes wide, mouths half open, frozen in that animal moment between running and paralysis. Ara saw them, measured them. Not soldiers, not threats. They were civilians, pawns trapped in a war they didn't sign up for. Her voice, once soft with the varnish of service, came out sharp and hard, snapping like a drill sergeant's whip. "Out the back!" Now the staff jolted, as though shocked by a live wire. Their hands scrambled at the steel bolt on the back door. One of the sous chefs fumbled, knuckles white, breath ragged. They'd never moved so fast in their lives, and yet to Ara it was agonizingly slow. She felt the seconds bleeding out, each one an invitation for the heavies behind her to breach. She needed time. Her eyes swept the counters. On a cutting board lay a cast-iron skillet, still hot from scallops, handle blackened, grease popping, like a chorus of impatient clicks. She grabbed it barehanded, the heat biting her palm through adrenaline's numbness. Not a weapon she would have chosen, but weapons were never about choice. They were about opportunity. The kitchen doors slammed open. The second heavy, Carlos, wide as a refrigerator, burst through with his pistol raised in both hands. His voice came out a low snarl. "Crazy bitch. You're dead." She didn't wait for him to aim. The skillet left her hand in a flat, brutal arc. It spun once, heavy as a promise, and clipped his shoulder and wrist. He grunted, weapon wavering, his aim thrown skyward. She was already on him, a blur of movement low to the ground. Her shoulder crashed into his chest like a battering ram, her smaller frame channeling momentum, not mass. He stumbled backward, crashing into a prep table. His gun barked once, the sound thunderous, a bullet carving a line in the ceiling tiles. Ara's left hand shot out, clamping his gun wrist. Not to disarm. Disarming was a luxury. Control was what mattered. She forced the muzzle upward while her right hand became a piston, hammering his throat in 3 rapid strikes. His eyes bulged, gagging, body gasping for air it couldn't find. His fingers loosened, the pistol clattering to the tiles. She twisted his wrist sharply, a movement etched into her muscles years ago in a gym that smelled of sweat and despair. A crack, a groan, and then he was falling. His skull struck the corner of the steel counter with a wet thud. His weight went slack. 2 down. The kitchen was suddenly still, save for the ragged breathing of the staff as they finally tore the back door open and spilled into the rainy alley. Ara's lungs burned. Her knuckles throbbed. The skillet's ghost still seared her palm. She felt the locket at her chest, hot now, like it carried the fire of her brother's grave. And she hated herself, just a little, for how natural it felt. She scooped the fallen Glock off the floor. Its weight was familiar, unholy comfort in her hand. She thumbed the magazine, nearly full, safety off. Muscle memory sang back to her, notes of a song she had sworn never to hum again. A sound cut through the kitchen, the whisper of shoes on carpet outside, careful steps. Scouts. They weren't brawlers. They were watchers, meant to seal the exits and keep the machine humming. But Bellini had authorized force. She could hear it in the quick, nervous shuffle of their approach. She grabbed a pot of boiling water from the stove, holding it steady with a dish towel. Her chest rose, fell. Her pulse slowed. The kitchen door swung inward. She moved first. The pot tipped forward, a scalding wave arcing through the air. A scream ripped out. Luca, one of the scouts, caught across the face and chest. His gun clanged to the floor as he clawed at his skin, a sound half howl, half child's cry. Anton flinched at the spray, just enough for her to close the distance. She slipped past Luca's thrashing body, Glock low and tight. She slammed the pistol's grip up into Anton's chin. His teeth clacked shut with a crack like breaking glass, his head snapping back, his legs folded. He collapsed in a heap, 3 down, 4. The box was broken. Only Marco remained. She straightened, pistol steady, shoulders squared. Her breath came calm now, a storm eye. Through the swinging kitchen doors, she saw him, standing across the dining room, velvet curtains swaying, the chandeliers trembling with the echoes of gunfire. Marco Bellini had his pistol trained not on her, but on Croft. The billionaire sat stiff in his booth, expression unreadable, but his eyes, those tired blue eyes, watched Ara as though she were the only thing in the room. Marco's voice slid out, calm, cold. "Drop it. Drop the gun, waitress, or your king here gets a hole between the eyes." Ara's Glock leveled, unwavering. "You walk out that door right now, you live. Stay and you don't." A harsh laugh burst out of Marco, grating as broken glass. "You think you're a hero? You're a ghost in an apron. I am Marco Bellini. I've pulled presidents out of their beds. I've made oil barons beg. You think I fear a waitress with a pistol?" Ara's voice dropped to a whisper, cold as the rain rattling the shattered windows. "You brought your war into my house. You threatened my guests. I'm not asking again." For the first time in years, Marco hesitated. He saw her then, not the uniform, not the plain face, but the posture, the stillness, the predator's gaze. She wasn't bluffing. She wasn't ordinary. His gut, honed by years of violence, screamed it. The room hung on a knife's edge. The patrons huddled on the floor, eyes wide, breath shallow. The chandeliers swayed gently, crystal teardrops catching flashes of police lights drawing near outside. Marco fired, but not at Croft. The shot slammed into the floorboards by the booth, splintering oak, a deafening crack that ripped screams from the diners. Croft jerked back instinctively. The noise was the cover Marco needed. He dove, rolling behind an overturned oak table, disappearing from her line of sight. A professional move. Use cover, force a siege. Ara slid along the booths, Glock steady, eyes cutting for angles. Silence swallowed the room again, punctured only by the drip of rain through shattered glass. Somewhere, Marco's breath waited. "You're good," his voice called out, muffled behind the heavy table. "But you're alone. One woman against time." "I can wait all night." She ignored him, breathing shallow, every muscle wired. Her shoes made no sound against the carpet. She glanced at a couple huddled beneath a table, the man shielding the woman. Their eyes locked on hers. For a second, Ara's mask slipped, and they saw not a waitress but a promise. "Stay down. I'll finish this." At the maitre d' station, her gaze snagged on a bronze swan statue, decorative, absurdly heavy. An idea sparked, reckless, desperate. She shrugged off her black jacket, draped it over the statue, and lifted it high. In the rain-smeared glass, it cast the outline of a human form. Marco bit. 2 shots cracked, shattering the front window, wind howling in, shards raining down like glittering knives. But Ara was already sprinting low from the flank, Glock steady. She hit him like a freight train. His pistol skittered across the carpet. Their bodies hit the floor, limbs tangled, weight shifting. Now it was teeth, bone, will. Marco was muscle, raw and disciplined. He twisted, trying to mount her, but Ara struck fast. An elbow into his ribs, a palm heel into his nose. Cartilage cracked, blood spurting hot across his lips. He swung wild, a haymaker fueled by rage. She ducked, trapped his arm, bent the elbow against its hinge. His scream was raw, animal, a sound that broke the room's silence. His strength bled out with it. "The drive!" he gasped, voice bubbling with blood. "Where's the drive?" Even in agony, his mind clung to the mission. Era's face hardened. This wasn't for her. It wasn't for Croft. It was for every terrified soul in that room. For her brother, for the vow that she would never again watch innocence bleed while she stood still. She twisted harder. A population. Marco collapsed, arm useless, body writhing. The ghost was broken. She stood over him, chest heaving, Glock steady at her side. Around her, silence pressed in again. Shattered glass crunching under shifting feet. The sobs of wealthy patrons who had just tasted real fear. The faint chorus of sirens closing in. Julian Croft rose slowly from his booth, pale, disbelieving. His gaze fixed on Ara not as a servant, but as a puzzle that might change everything. But before his lips shaped a word, Marco's broken voice rasped the one that froze Era's blood cold. "Thorne. Robert Thorne sends his regards." The locket at her chest burned. Memories flooded. Dusty gems, the sting of Sergeant Kalen's fists, and a kind man with gray temples who had once lifted her from the ashes of her brother's death. Robert Thorne, the benefactor who had saved her life. The man who had just tried to end it. The sirens wailed louder, red and blue bleeding across the rain-streaked glass. Era stood in the wreckage of the Gilded Spoon, gun in hand, heart split between the billionaire she'd just saved and the savior she now might have to fight. The wail of sirens thickened until it swallowed the night. Outside, the storm had slowed to a drizzle, but the red and blue strobes flashing against the wet glass of the Gilded Spoon made the rain look like blood and bruises. The shattered window rattled in its frame as boots thundered on the pavement. Then came the crash of the front door flung wide, the bark of orders filling the space like a second storm. NYPD, hands where we can see 'em. Patrons who minutes ago had been titans of finance and heirs to dynasties, now cowered like school children caught cheating. Pale hands rose from behind velvet booths. A woman in pearls whimpered when an officer's flashlight swept her eyes. The chandeliers quivered under the weight of shouted commands, as though the crystal itself feared breaking. Ara stood in the middle of it, Glock dangling from her hand, posture square and calm. Her chest still heaved from the fight, but her face betrayed nothing. The locket pressed hot into her sternum. To the officers storming in, she looked like the calmest person in the room, which made her the most dangerous. "Drop the weapon." Her fingers tightened on the grip for half a second, a last flicker of rebellion. Then she set the pistol on a linen-draped table with deliberate care. The metallic clink sounded like punctuation. Her empty hands rose, palms forward, skin raw and bloodied. Julian Croft moved slowly from his booth, his tailored suit dusted with plaster and wood chips. Unlike the other patrons, he did not raise his hands. Instead, he adjusted his cufflinks as if preparing for a board meeting. His voice rolled out steady, commanding and oddly soothing in the chaos. "Officers, this woman just saved every life in this room." Detective Ronan Heller shouldered his way through the uniforms, trench coat dripping, face carved with lines deeper than the East River docks. He had the weary eyes of a man who'd seen too many bad nights. He glanced at the unconscious heavies strewn about the floor, the shattered glass, the wealthy patrons shaking in their pearls. Then he looked at Era. "You did this?" His tone wasn't admiration. It was disbelief bordering on accusation. Ara's throat was dry, but her voice came out clear. "They came for him." She tilted her chin toward Croft. I stopped them. Heller studied her. His eyes caught the bruises blooming along her cheek, the split skin on her knuckles. He'd seen brawlers, soldiers, cops, people who knew the weight of violence. This waitress carried it like a second skin. He didn't like it. "Cuff her," he ordered, almost reluctantly. Cold steel bit Ara's wrists. The sound of the click echoed in her ears louder than any gunshot. She lowered her gaze, not out of shame, but calculation. She had expected this. A woman with a Glock in a room of billionaires never got the benefit of the doubt. Croft stepped forward, calm as a man hailing a cab. "Detective, you're making an error. She's no criminal. She's the reason I'm alive." Heller gave him a look that could sour milk. "Mr. Croft, you'll have your chance to testify. For now, she comes with us." Ara was led out into the wet night. Rain beaded on her hair, slid cold down her collar. The back seat of the squad car smelled of stale sweat and disinfectant, a reminder that every story, no matter how gilded, could end in a cage. The interrogation room was a shoebox lit by buzzing fluorescent tubes. The walls sweated institutional beige. A mirror, one way she knew, stared back at her. Her reflection looked ghostly, pale from exhaustion, eyes ringed with shadows. The locket glinted faintly at her throat, hidden mostly by the collar of her borrowed gray sweater. They had taken her uniform, bagged it for evidence, leaving her stripped of anonymity. Detective Heller sat across from her, shoulders hunched, tie loosened. He slid a cup of burnt coffee across the table. She didn't touch it. "You want to tell me how a waitress puts 4 trained men in the hospital and another in traction?" His voice was flat, neither hostile nor friendly. Just tired. Ara clasped her raw hands together, fingers trembling faintly despite her calm exterior. "They threatened the guests. I acted. That ain't an answer." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "I got witnesses say you moved like a professional. Not lucky. Not desperate. Professional. You military?" Ara's lips tightened. Memories crowded her. Sergeant Kalin barking in her ear, sweat-soaked mats, fists pounding discipline into bone. She had bled her way through drills until hesitation was a foreign language. But none of that existed on paper. "No," she said simply. Heller exhaled through his nose, unconvinced but unwilling to press yet. He rubbed his temple like the whole mess was a migraine. "Your lucky Crofts got lawyers crawling all over this, like ants on sugar. Otherwise, I'd be booking you on assault with a deadly." The door opened. In strode Julian Croft's legal phalanx. 2 suits sharp enough to cut glass, and an assistant balancing a briefcase like it held nuclear codes. They were followed by Croft himself, uninvited, yet impossible to stop. His presence shifted the room's gravity. Even Heller sat up straighter. Croft's gaze cut to Ara. He said nothing at first, only studied her like she was a chess piece he'd never accounted for. Then, in his low baritone, he spoke to Heller. "This woman leaves with me." Heller bristled. "That's not how it works, Mr. Croft." "She's a witness, possibly a suspect." Croft adjusted his cufflinks, a gesture Ara had already learned meant he was about to dismantle someone politely. "She defended civilians in my establishment. Your witnesses will testify to that. Any further detainment will be considered harassment, and my attorneys will make that case vigorously in federal court." The lawyers echoed his threat in smoother language. Papers shuffled, citations flew. Heller, outnumbered, threw up his hands. "Fine." She walks. "But don't think this is over." He pointed at Ara, his gaze sharp. "You and me, we're going to talk again." Ara didn't respond. She was already on her feet, her wrists free. the cold bite of the cuff still ghosting her skin. Croft's town car was a cocoon of leather and muted city light. Rain streaked the tinted windows, distorting Manhattan into a smear of neon and shadows. The air smelled faintly of cedar and expensive cologne. Ara sat stiffly across from him, her hands folded in her lap. Her knuckles throbbed, each scrape a reminder. Croft studied her with the intensity of a man dissecting a market trend. "Miss Vance," he began, voice measured, "you saved my life tonight." She turned her gaze to the window. "That wasn't my intent." A rare flicker of surprise crossed his features. "No? I saved the people in that room," she said, voice low, even. "You were incidental." He considered this, a faint smile ghosting his lips. Honesty. How refreshing, he leaned back, fingers steepled. "Still, I owe you. And I do not like debts unpaid." Ara's thumb rubbed the locket absently, hidden by her folded arms. Her mind wasn't in the car. It was back in the restaurant, replaying Marco's broken sneer, the name he spat like poison. Thorne, Robert Thorne. The man who had saved her life once with kindness and opportunity. The man who now wanted Julian Croft destroyed. Her voice cracked the silence. "Robert Thorne. What does he want from you?" Croft's expression hardened, a mask sliding into place. "Thorne is a relic with dangerous ideas. He believes chaos is a tool. I believe stability is survival. We are at odds." She searched his face for cracks, for truth hidden beneath the corporate polish. "He was different to me." For the first time, Croft's eyes softened. Curiosity. "Tell me." Ara's throat tightened. Memories welled. The community center's peeling paint, the boxing gym Thorne had built, Sergeant Kalen's gravel-voiced commands, and her brother, David, dead on a sidewalk over $20. Thorne had walked into that chaos like a savior. He had given her structure, discipline, a way to turn rage into strength. Without him, she would have been swallowed by the streets. But she said none of it. Instead, she shook her head. "Doesn't matter." Croft watched her a moment longer, then let it go. He looked out the window at the skyline, lights glittering like cold stars. "Whether you accept it or not, Miss Vance, you are part of this now. Thorne knows your face. He will not forget it." The car rolled to a stop outside a discreet brownstone. Croft gestured. "A safe house." For tonight, Ara hesitated. "And tomorrow?" His lips curved faintly, not a smile, but something sharper. "Tomorrow, we talk about debts and choices." The safe house was modest by Billionaire. Standards, 3 floors of brick and iron railings, windows curtained, hallways lined with the faint smell of polish and fresh paint. A maid showed her to a room that felt both empty and watched. Clean sheets, a single lamp, silence humming too loud. Ara sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped in her lap. The adrenaline had drained away, leaving her hollow, trembling. She pulled the locket from beneath her collar, flipped it open. Inside, a worn photo of her and David, his arms slung over her shoulders, both of them smiling like fools. She pressed her forehead to it, eyes burning. The world had folded in on itself. Thorne and Croft, 2 titans grinding against each other. And her, caught between, carrying skills gifted by one and now valued by the other. Her vow echoed in her bones, never again a victim. But tonight had proved something darker. Never again anonymous. The storm outside had passed, but inside her, it had only just begun. Morning in Manhattan always begins with noise. Even in the insulated quiet of Croft's safe house, Ara woke to the growl of garbage trucks, the hiss of buses braking, the far-off siren song that never really ends in this city. She sat on the edge of the bed, hair damp from the shower, uniform gone, replaced with plain clothes that fit too well to have been chosen by accident. Craftspeople had stocked the closet. Neutral colors, practical cuts, nothing flashy. Clothes that could belong to anyone, and therefore made her someone who belonged nowhere. She touched the locket at her throat, thumb brushing the worn hinge. David's smile, frozen in that faded photograph, was both anchor and blade. She had stepped into a war not of her making, yet his absence reminded her she had been training for it all along. By the time she descended the narrow staircase, a driver waited. Tall, silent, suit cut sharp enough to slice paper. He didn't introduce himself, just opened the car door with a gloved hand. The ride uptown was smooth, insulated from the morning chaos. But Era felt the city pressing through the tinted glass, steam rising from subway grates, street vendors shouting over carts of bagels, horns blaring in a discordant symphony. She had once been part of it, invisible among millions. Now she was something else. Not yet a player, but no longer a ghost. Croft's tower speared into the sky like a blade of glass and steel. The lobby swallowed her, all marble floors and echoing space. Security men stood with earpieces and stone faces, but they didn't stop her. A nod from the driver was enough. She passed through the detectors untouched, the hum of power brushing against her skin like static. Elevator doors whispered open. Inside, chrome walls reflected her face back in fractured angles. She hated the way her reflection looked now. Half waitress, half soldier, neither whole. As the elevator rose, the city fell away in the mirrored glass until the doors opened on the top floor. Croft's office stretched the entire breadth of the building. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Manhattan in all its restless sprawl. Bridges arching like ribs, the river glinting with early light, taxis no bigger than toy cars. The air smelled faintly of leather and paper, the understated scent of old wealth. Julian Croft stood near the windows, hands clasped behind his back, gaze sweeping the city like a general surveying his battlefield. His suit was flawless, his tie a muted silk, his shoes polished to mirrors. He looked, Ara thought, like a man carved from the same glass and steel as the building. He turned when she entered. His eyes, cold, sharp, yet weary, studied her as though she were an investment with unpredictable yield. "Miss Vance," he said, voice low, measured, "thank you for coming." She stepped closer, her posture wary but unbowed. "I wasn't asked." One corner of his mouth twitched. Semantics. "You were always going to be here. After last night, anonymity is a luxury you no longer have." Her eyes narrowed. "Whose fault is that?" His expression didn't change. "Thorns. And mine." For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick with unsaid things. The city hummed through the glass, but in here it was just them. Two predators circling, neither quite ready to strike. Croft gestured to a sleek table near the windows. On it lay a small gold-feathered data drive, the Phoenix drive. Its metallic sheen caught the light, gleaming like a relic. Era's breath hitched despite herself. "So it's real," she murmured. Croft's eyes flicked to her, sharp as a blade. "Very real, and very dangerous." She folded her arms. "Then explain." He moved to the table, picked up the drive, turned it between his fingers. His voice, when he spoke, was almost reverent. "The Phoenix drive is a failsafe. Years of data, financial markets, trade routes, energy grids, communications webs, all condensed, analyzed, and projected. It can model collapse before it happens. With this, I can stop crises before they bloom. Or, his eyes met hers, a man like Thorn can burn the world to ash in the name of rebuilding it. Era studied him. He believed what he said. She could hear it in his cadence, see it in the tightness of his jaw. But she also saw the other truth, the glint of control, the hunger for leverage. The Phoenix Drive wasn't just protection, it was domination dressed in the language of stability. "And Thorn?" she asked, voice steady. Croft's gaze shifted, darkened. Thorn thinks collapse is purification. He believes systems must break to be reborn. He once built a community center to test his theories. Her heart lurched. She masked it, but not well enough. "You know of it?" Croft asked quietly. Ara's fingers gripped her arms until her nails bit skin. Memories crowded in. The smell of sweat on old mats. The sting of Sergeant Kalen's barked orders. Thorn's kind smile as he watched her learn to turn rage into precision. "I was one of those kids," she admitted, voice thin. "After my brother died." Croft regarded her, something like understanding flickering across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by calculation. "Then you understand why he's dangerous. His kindness is the sugar that coats the poison. He makes children believe in discipline so he can justify tearing down the structures that keep the world intact." Era shook her head. "That's not the man I knew." His eyes softened, just barely. "People change. Or maybe you never saw the whole of him." Silence pressed again, thick and heavy. Era's chest felt tight, her locket burning cold against her skin. Was Croft right? Had she been a pawn in Thorn's greater game all along? Or was Croft rewriting history to fit his empire? Finally, Croft set the Phoenix Drive back on the table, his gaze sharpened. "Regardless of your past, last night changed everything. You're no longer invisible. You've shown yourself to me, to Thorn, to anyone watching. You have two choices: vanish and spend the rest of your life running, or stand beside me and shape the field." Her voice cut back, flinty. "You mean be your weapon?" His lips curved, faint, ironic. "No, I have plenty of weapons. I need an equal, someone who sees before others do, someone who acts when hesitation would cost lives." She blinked. The words hit harder than any flattery. Equal. It wasn't what she expected from a man like him, but Ara had learned not to be dazzled. Her arms stayed folded, her voice cool. "If I agree, I set terms." Croft inclined his head, as though conceding a point in a negotiation. "Name them." Her chest rose with a steadying breath. "First, Robert Thorn. No retaliation, no assassination attempts, no shadow wars. The stalemate holds." For the first time, Croft hesitated, his jaw flexed, his gaze hardening. Then he nodded once, curtly. "Done." Second, she stepped closer, meeting his eyes head-on. "The Phoenix Drive stays with me." "Not you, not Thorn, me. I'll decide when it's used, and when it isn't." The air between them stiffened. Croft's eyes narrowed, calculating. For a long, taut moment, Era thought he might laugh or refuse or have her killed right there. Instead, slowly, a smile spread across his lips. Not the slick grin of power, but something genuine. "Respect. You're not the soldier I thought you were," he said softly. "You're the safeguard I didn't know I needed." He extended his hand. A billionaire's hand, manicured, firm, dangerous. Era looked at it for a long beat, then at his face, then finally clasped it with her scarred knuckles. The handshake sealed something larger than a deal. It was a contract of shadows, a pact written not on paper, but in scars and steel. The waitress had been buried. In her place stood Era Vance, neither Croft's bodyguard nor Thorn's pawn, but a woman holding the line between destruction and survival, leverage, and loyalty. The city glittered below, restless, hungry, blind to the war beginning above its rooftops. And in that office, Era Vance chose her place, not as anyone's servant, but as the equalizer. The city had a way of testing newcomers, even those born inside its bones. Ara Vance had lived her whole life in New York, but the morning she walked into Croft Enterprises as something more than a ghost waitress, it felt as though the place was measuring her, weighing her, deciding if she belonged. The skyscraper's glass skin caught the rising sun and threw it across the Hudson in bright shards, as if the building itself were a lighthouse, warning ships away rather than drawing them in. She stood outside for a beat, hood pulled low, the collar of her jacket stiff against her jaw. The people streaming past, men in tailored suits carrying leather briefcases, women in heels sharp enough to be weapons, barely glanced at her. Yet inside, beyond the rotating glass doors, her name had already been spoken in rooms where secrets cost fortunes. That knowledge made the morning air feel heavier, tinged with exhaust and ambition. When she finally pushed through the doors, the lobby swallowed her whole. Marble polished to a blinding shine stretched in every direction. Security cameras blinked red from discreet corners. A desk sat at the center, curved like a crescent moon, manned by a receptionist who looked like models moonlighting as gatekeepers. For a moment, the smell of antiseptic polish and cologne took her back to Aurelia, the restaurant, and how she had perfected in invisibility by being smaller than the furniture. But here, that trick would not save her. A guard in a dark suit approached, hand to his earpiece. "Miss Vance?" His tone wasn't quite a question. "Yes." Her voice was calm, though her pulse beat hard against the locket at her chest. "Follow me." The elevator ride to the upper floors was silent, but for the soft hum of machinery. The man didn't look at her once, his jaw a tight square. Era studied his reflection in the mirrored walls. A man who had pledged his life to Croft's chain of command, steady, unthinking. She wondered what it would take to snap that kind of loyalty, or whether it was loyalty at all, rather than fear disguised in a suit. The doors opened onto a different world. Carpet thick enough to swallow footsteps, walls paneled with dark wood that smelled faintly of cedar. The lighting was soft, golden, casting long shadows that made the hallway feel both expensive and conspiratorial. This was not an office floor. It was a throne room disguised as corporate architecture. Waiting at the end was Julian Croft. He didn't wear his power-like jewelry the way Tiffany Davenport had, loud and insecure. His power was the silence of a storm right before the thunder. Today he had abandoned the charcoal suit for navy, his tie a muted gray. He might as well have been wearing armor. "Welcome," he said, and though the word was polite, the way it rolled off his tongue suggested it was less invitation than confirmation. Ara gave a curt nod. "You said you wanted me here. Now I am not here." His lips curved in something close to amusement. "Here." He gestured to the room behind him. She stepped past him into what had once been a conference space, but now looked more like a war room. Maps of global trade routes glowed on digital walls. Screens ticked with streams of financial data, stock prices dancing like ants. At the far end, a glass table stretched long and narrow, scattered with folders, tablets, and a few thick manila envelopes. The room smelled of ozone from the electronics, underscored by the faint metallic tang of coffee left too long on a warmer. 3 men and 1 woman already occupied seats around the table. All wore the look of people who had clawed their way to the top and didn't appreciate being told someone new had joined their nest. Ara recognized the language in their posture. Arms crossed, spine straight, eyes narrowing with appraisal. Predators, everyone. Croft motioned for her to sit. Everyone, this is Ara Vance. She will be taking on oversight of a new division, reporting directly to me, the woman, sharp-faced with hair cut in a blunt bob that gleamed like onyx, arched an eyebrow. Division of what? Her voice had the crisp edge of someone who preferred questions to be knives. Gray space, Croft replied evenly. Threats, before they become threats. Problems before they have names. One of the men, a heavy-set figure with a gold signet ring and a tie patterned like currency, snorted. So we're giving a waitress a spy agency. Ara didn't flinch. Better than giving it to a banker. Her tone was flat, factual, but the quick flush of anger that crawled up the man's neck told her the strike had landed. Croft's eyes glimmered, just faintly. He enjoyed the clash. Miss Vance has proven herself in a crucible none of you were present for. She stopped Marco Bellini and his men in under 12 minutes. The room shifted at that name. Marco Bellini was known, even in these circles, as a professional ghost. The fact that Ara had beaten him wasn't just impressive, it was terrifying. The onyx-haired woman's eyes narrowed further, not in disbelief, but in recalibration. Ara sat down slowly, her hands folded in front of her. The locket pressed cool against her chest. She didn't want to be here. Every fiber of her body ached for the anonymity she had buried. But that path was closed. Now, she had to carve something new. Croft began outlining her mandate, surveillance teams that reported not to the board, but to her. Budgets hidden under strategic research. A skeleton staff she would handpick. As he spoke, the others listened, silent but tense, like predators unsure whether to fight or follow. Ara only half heard the logistics. Her mind drifted back to Marco's words, to Robert Thorne's name spat like both curse and prayer. She saw Thorne's weathered smile, his quiet lectures in that Brooklyn community center, Sergeant Kalin barking over the sound of fists on pads. She remembered the first time she'd stood her ground against a boy twice her size, the taste of iron in her mouth when she refused to quit. All of it, Thorne's gift, and now she was being asked to guard against him. When Croft finished, silence stretched. Then the man with the signet ring leaned forward, his smile slick. You'll forgive us if we have questions. Miss Vance has no resume, no credentials. She comes from nowhere and expects us to believe she's fit to handle matters of national scale? Ara's gaze cut to him, steady as stone. Your credentials didn't stop Marco Bellini from walking into a restaurant and nearly taking your employer. Mine did, the man bristled. The woman smirked faintly. Croft said nothing. He didn't need to. The balance of power was shifting, subtle as a tide. After the meeting broke, Croft caught her by the window. The city lay beneath them, restless as ever. You handled yourself well, he said. Ara shook her head. They'll never trust me. They don't have to. His eyes reflected the skyline, steel and fire. They only have to fear you enough not to get in your way. Her throat tightened. She thought of David, of Thorne, of all the kids at the community center who had learned discipline not as a tool of fear, but of survival. Croft's version twisted it into something colder. She wasn't sure yet if she could live in that world without losing herself. But when she looked at the city, spread wide and merciless beneath her, she knew one thing. She had already chosen. The waitress was gone. The ghost was gone. Ara Vance had stepped into the storm, and there was no way back. The first lesson of running a shadow division was simple. No one could know it existed. Croft gave her a sliver of the budget, disguised as market resilience strategy, and told her to spend it as she saw fit. That was how Ara Vance found herself in a half-abandoned warehouse on the fringes of Queens, the kind of place where pigeons strutted across rafters and rainwater dripped through rusted gutters like a slow clock. She stood in the middle of the concrete floor, arms folded, while 4 people waited in a loose semicircle. Croft had let her pick them on the condition she kept it small, manageable, deniable. Ara had combed through resumes, disciplinary reports, even arrest records. She didn't want polished agents with pristine files. She wanted people who'd been underestimated, written off, underestimated the way she had been. There was Malik, a wiry ex-NYPD detective who had walked away after internal affairs closed in. He smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and stubbornness. There was Samira, a hacker with half her hair shaved and the other half dyed cobalt blue, whose record contained more sealed cases than open ones. There was Ortiz, a medic dishonorably discharged for questioning orders in Afghanistan, his hands steady even when his eyes weren't. And there was Keller, a hulking former security contractor who had been fired from Croft's own detail after breaking a senator's jaw during a misunderstanding. Ara studied them one by one. Their postures told her everything. Malik leaning on his heels like he'd seen it all. Samira twitching with energy like a live wire. Ortiz clutching his duffel like a shield. Keller glaring as though daring her to prove she was worth listening to. They weren't a team. Not yet. But in their flaws, she saw the pieces of one. "You're here because you don't fit," Ara said, her voice steady, carrying just enough to echo off the bare walls. "Croft doesn't want you, the city doesn't want you, maybe even your families don't. But I do, because I don't want polished, I want sharp. And sharp things cut both ways." Her words hung in the damp air. Malik smirked faintly. Samira raised an eyebrow. Keller just crossed his arms, unimpressed. Ortiz shifted, uncertain. "Why us?" Malik finally asked, his tone skeptical. Ara stepped closer, her locket pressing cool against her skin. "Because I've seen what happens when the world ignores people like us. We get trampled, or we burn everything down. I want a third option." Something flickered in their eyes. Not belief, not yet, but curiosity. That was enough to start. Their first test came 2 nights later. Croft summoned her to his office, the skyline glowing blood red in the late evening sun. He didn't waste words. "Thorne has a man inside our supply chain. He's feeding shipment data out of Newark. Find him. Remove him." Ara's jaw tightened. "Remove?" Croft's gaze was steady. "Interpret as you see fit." So she did. The warehouse became their staging ground. Samira cracked into shipping manifests, while Ortiz brewed black coffee strong enough to melt concrete. Malik muttered about angles of approach, his pencil scratching on a notepad, while Keller sat sharpening a combat knife as if to remind everyone why he was there. The target was a mid-level logistics officer named Harold Brandt, mid-40s, thinning hair, 2 kids in private school he could barely afford. On paper, he was ordinary, too ordinary, which made him the perfect mole. Ara led her team to Newark on a night thick with fog rolling off the bay. They moved in 2 unmarked vans, engines low, headlights off as long as they could manage. The air smelled of diesel and salt, warehouses rising like black hulks against the water. Inside one of them, Brant was supposed to be working late. Ara crouched in the shadows, pistol holstered at her side. The others waited behind her, breaths fogging in the cold. Every sound was magnified. The creak of metal siding, the distant horn of a ship, the drip of water onto concrete. "Samira," Ara whispered. The girl's fingers danced over her tablet. A moment later, the lock clicked. The door yawned open with a groan. Inside, the warehouse was a cathedral of steel racks stacked with containers. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, painting everything in sickly green. And there, hunched at a desk, was Brant. He looked up, startled, eyes wide behind wire-framed glasses. "Wait, who?" Malik stepped forward, badge voice still in him. "Mr. Brant, stay seated." Brant froze, hands hovering uselessly above the keyboard. Ara stepped into the light. She saw the sweat bead on his forehead, the pulse in his throat. He knew. "Robert Thorne," Ara said softly. "What does he have on you?" His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "My kids," he whispered. "Tuition. The debts." He said it was just numbers. Just numbers. Ara's stomach twisted. Thorne had always known where to press. He hadn't changed. Behind her, Keller muttered, "Let's just end this." His hand flexed near his knife. "No!" Ara snapped. Her voice was sharp enough to slice the air. "We don't kill pawns." Brant looked at her, tears pricking his eyes. "Please!" Ara crouched, meeting his gaze head-on. "You're going to walk away from this. Tonight, you're going to vanish. Your kids will think you took a new job in another state. Croft's people will never hear your name again. Do you understand?" He nodded frantically. Relief flooded his features. But Ara wasn't done. She leaned in closer, her whisper a scalpel. "And you're going to carry a message back to Robert Thorne. Tell him Ara Vance remembers Brooklyn. Tell him she remembers David. And tell him the stalemate is over when I say it is." Brant's breath caught. He nodded again, harder this time. When they left him trembling in the green light, Malik muttered, "That wasn't Croft's definition of remove." Ara pulled her hood up as they vanished into the fog. "Croft doesn't get to define everything." The drive back was silent, the city lights smeared through wet windows. Ara's chest was tight, her thoughts a storm. She had spared Brant, but she knew Croft would see it as weakness. And Thorne would see it as a signal. The locket at her throat was a weight, dragging her back into the past, even as the road carried her forward. The next morning, Croft summoned her. His office was bathed in pale winter sun, his posture unreadable. "Brant disappeared," he said. Ara met his eyes. "Yes." "You let him live?" "Yes." A beat of silence. Then, unexpectedly, Croft smiled. Not kindly, never kindly, but like a man pleased by an unexpected move in chess. "Interesting. I thought you'd kill him." "I'm not your executioner," Ara said. His smile widened. "No, you're more dangerous than that. You're unpredictable." For the first time, Ara realized he respected her not because she obeyed, but because she didn't. And that terrified her more than hatred ever could. That night, when she returned to the warehouse, her team was waiting. They didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. They had seen her choice. Malik gave her a nod, small but solid. Samira offered her a drive of scrubbed data, silent proof of her loyalty. Ortiz just poured her coffee without a word. Even Keller, scowling, seemed less ready to challenge. In their eyes, Ara saw the shape of something forming. Not Croft's department, not Thorne's rebellion, hers. And as the city outside buzzed with its endless hunger, Ara Vance understood. She was no longer walking someone else's path. She was cutting her own. Ara Vance had learned that beginnings were noisy, but middles were quiet. A week after Newark, the warehouse in Queens felt almost domestic. The pigeons still strutted along the rafters, and rain still tapped on rusted metal like a metronome. But now, there were cots in one corner, folding tables littered with laptops, weapons, and too much coffee. The team, her team, was falling into rhythm, though the rhythm was jagged and improvisational, like a band that hadn't agreed on the key. Malik still smoked near the back door, even though the sign above it said, "No smoking." Samira lived in the glow of her screens, blue hair brighter in LED light than in daylight. Ortiz polished instruments that belonged in a hospital while Keller did the same to his knife, a mirror of discipline and threat. And Ara? She stood in the middle, not saying much, because a leader doesn't fill silence with noise. A leader waits for the silence to press back. Her silence was full of ghosts. David's face came to her most nights. Her brother laughing in the kitchen, flour on his nose, before everything went bad. Then Sergeant Kalin, whose training had carved her raw fury into something sharp. And always Robert Thorne, the man who had lit the fuse of her life without knowing it, who had raised her up and indirectly dragged her into Croft's service. Croft thought he owned her. Thorne thought he understood her. Both were wrong. She was beginning to believe she could hold the line between them. Until the night, the line snapped. It started with a phone call. Malik had rigged an old rotary phone to intercept encrypted messages. Ugly machine, wires spilling like guts. But it worked. When it rang, the whole warehouse froze. Samira snatched the receiver, her face draining color. "Bomb threat," she whispered. "Midtown, Croft Tower." The name landed like a hammer. Croft's headquarters wasn't just a building, it was the man's monument. 80 stories of glass and steel, his name glowing over the skyline like a god's autograph. If Thorne was willing to strike there, it meant no more whispers. This was war in the daylight. Ara didn't hesitate. "Gear up. 10 minutes." They piled into vans that smelled of gasoline and adrenaline. New York blurred by in streaks of neon and rain, as sirens wailed somewhere too far off to matter. Ara sat in the passenger seat, eyes locked on the city rushing past. She didn't speak. Orders weren't needed now. What mattered was the quiet coil in her chest, the one that steadied her hands when the storm broke. Croft Tower loomed ahead, a blade of light cutting the night sky. Police had cordoned off the block, their cruisers strobing red and blue. Crowds pressed against barricades, faces glowing with curiosity and fear. The building's glass facade shimmered with reflections of chaos. "Looks like Thorne left us a present," Keller muttered, hefting his duffel. "Or a message," Ara said. Her voice was calm, but her stomach twisted. Thorne didn't bluff with bombs. If he said there was one, there was one. Inside, the lobby was evacuated, marble floors echoing with shouted orders and hurried boots. Security guards looked relieved when Ara strode in, badgeless but somehow in charge. They didn't question her. She moved like someone who knew where she was going. Samira tapped furiously at a tablet. Signals coming from the sub-basement. "Utility tunnels." Ara nodded. "Malik, with me." "Ortiz, Keller, cover our backs. Samira, keep us connected." The elevator rattled them down. The air grew cooler, damp, with a metallic tang of rust and old pipes. Lights flickered overhead, buzzing like insects. Ara's every nerve screamed alert. She moved with her Glock low and ready, Malik at her shoulder, the others trailing like shadows. They found the bomb in a maintenance corridor. It sat inside a crate marked cleaning supplies, wires glowing faintly green, a digital timer blinking down, 1452, 1451. Ortiz swore softly. That's military grade, not something you pull off eBay. Samira's voice crackled through Malik's earpiece. I'm in the circuit remotely, but it's layered. I can't just cut the feed. You'll need to improvise. Ara crouched by the device, the locket at her throat heavy as an anchor. She stared at the timer, at the wires running like veins, and she heard Sergeant Kalen's voice, gravel rough in memory. Fear is a clock. It ticks louder the closer you are to it. Ignore the tick. See the wires. She inhaled, slow. The air stank of mold and ozone. Her fingers moved not like a technician's, but like a fighter's, measured, deliberate, precise. She followed the current in her mind, mapping intention from chaos. Thorne wanted spectacle, not mass casualties. He designed for panic, not annihilation, which meant there was a fail-safe, a way to be seen stopping it. 3 wires, Ortiz murmured. Blue, red, black. Ara's lips curved into a grim smile. Always a cliché. She reached for the black. Malik hissed, You sure? No. And she cut. The timer froze at 11:07. Silence swallowed the corridor. Ara exhaled slowly. Her hands were steady. Inside, her chest was a storm. She had just played chicken with Robert Thorne, and won. But the victory soured quickly. A slow clap echoed from the shadows. From the far end of the corridor, a figure emerged. Tall, lean, dressed not in combat gear, but in a charcoal suit like he had wandered out of a boardroom. His face was familiar. Too familiar. Hello, Ara, he said. Her blood chilled. Elias, she breathed. He was Thorne's protege, the boy who had trained beside her in Kalen's gym years ago. They had sparred until their knuckles bled, laughed between bruises, whispered plans of escape from the streets. Then one night, he vanished. Now here he was, a ghost walking on polished shoes. You still cut the black wire, Elias said, his smile. Half admiration, half condescension. Kalen would be proud. Behind her, Keller shifted, knife half drawn. Ara raised a hand to stop him. This wasn't just an enemy. This was the past given flesh. What do you want? She asked. Elias spread his hands. Same as you, Ara. To survive. To matter. Only difference is, I chose the winning side. Her jaw tightened. Thorne sent you. He tilted his head. Thorne didn't send me. Thorne raised us both. I chose to remember that. The corridor seemed to shrink, walls closing in. Ara's team bristled behind her, waiting for an order. But inside, Ara's mind split in two. Part of her wanted to reach out, to ask why he'd left, why he'd become Thorne's shadow. The other part saw the glint in his eyes, the sharpness of a knife not yet drawn. Elias's smile faded. You'll have to choose soon. Croft or Thorne? You can't play neutral forever. He stepped back into the shadows, disappearing as silently as he had come. The echo of his words lingered longer than the bomb's tick. When Ara and her team emerged from the sub-basement, the police were already swarming, Croft's executives pacing like caged lions. Reporters shouted from behind barricades, cameras flashing like lightning. Croft himself waited in the lobby, jaw tight, eyes sharper than glass. You stopped it, he said, his voice low, controlled. Ara nodded once. For now. He studied her face, searching for cracks. Who? Thorne's people, she said. One of them was, someone I knew. Croft's eyes narrowed. A liability? Ara met his gaze. Her voice was steel, wrapped in velvet. A reminder. That night, back in the warehouse, Her team celebrated with cheap whiskey and louder laughter than they'd earned. But Era sat apart, the bottle untouched, the locket burning against her chest. Elias's voice replayed in her head like a broken record. You can't play neutral forever. She stared out at the city, its skyline jagged and alive, each light a promise or a threat. Croft wanted her to be his weapon. Thorne wanted her to remember his mercy. And somewhere between them, Era Vance was carving a place for herself, with bare, bleeding hands. The middle was quiet, yes. But the storm was coming back. And this time, it had her brother's ghost for a herald. The war didn't wait politely for Era Vance to be ready. It came roaring in like a subway train that had lost its brakes. It was midnight when the warehouse alarm screamed, Samira's cobbled system blaring like a dying animal. Era jolted awake on her cot, Glock in hand before her eyes were even open. The others scrambled too. Keller already shoving on boots, Malik cursing under his breath. Ortiz grabbing his medkit like it was a child he had to carry through a fire. Samira's voice cracked through the din. They're here, Thorne's men. Too many. The words snapped the air tight. Era felt her pulse even out. Strange calm, the kind that came before a fistfight you couldn't avoid. She moved fast, barking orders that cut through the chaos. Malik! Back door! Keller! Front! Ortiz! Get the lights down! Samira! With me! The warehouse went dark in a heartbeat, pigeons scattering from the rafters in a rush of wings. Outside, engines growled low, predatory. Then glass shattered. Entry from the east side. Flashlights speared the dark, and voices in clipped commands followed. Era crouched by a crate, Glock steady. She smelled oil and wet concrete, the tang of adrenaline sharp in her mouth. This was it. The storm Kaelin had trained her for. The one Thorne had promised was coming. The one Croft had paid to avoid. Shapes poured through the broken window, 3, then 5, then more. Armed, armored, moving with the surety of professionals. Croft's hired muscle would have blustered. Thorne's men moved like ghosts. The first one in swept his light across the floor. Era fired once, clean to his shoulder. He dropped, shouting, weapon clattering. Before his cry died, Keller's shotgun boomed from the front, rattling every window pane. Malik's voice followed, sharp with authority. Back off, or I drop the next one. Chaos bloomed. Shadows leapt in every direction, gunfire cracking, ricochets whining off metal beams. Ortiz dragged the wounded man deeper inside, hands already slick with blood. Samira ducked behind a table, fingers flying across her keyboard, trying to shut down the intruder's comms. Ara moved like smoke, low and fast, firing not to kill, but to break momentum. Each shot was a decision, each breath a recalibration. She wasn't fighting to protect Croft's secrets or to honor Thorne's ghost. She was fighting to keep her people alive. Then a voice cut through the noise. Ara! She froze for half a second only, but it was enough. She knew that voice. Elias. He stepped into the broken light spilling from the street, unarmed, palms open. Behind him, his squad fanned out, guns leveled. But his eyes never left hers. You don't have to do this, he called. His tone was steady, coaxing, the same voice that once had urged her through Kaelin's drills when her arms shook from exhaustion. Come with me. Thorne will take you back. He never stopped calling you family. The words hit harder than the gunfire. Era's throat tightened. Around her, Keller growled, He's stalling! But Malik snapped, Shut up! Let her think! Think. As if that were easy now. Era's chest heaved, the locket burning against her skin like a brand. She saw David smile. Kaylin's hard eyes, Thorne's gentle hands. She saw Croft's skyscraper, gleaming like a blade, and she saw her team, bruised, bloodied, but waiting, trusting her to decide. Elias took a step closer. His men didn't fire. They were waiting too. Croft will use you until you break. Thorne wants to build. With you. For you, Ara almost laughed. The irony stung like smoke in her eyes. And the bomb at Croft Tower? That was building? Elias's smile faltered. Collateral. A message. No one died? No thanks to you, Ara snapped. The standoff thickened, the air heavy with sweat, cordite, and too many futures colliding. Ara felt the choice like a weight in her bones. Croft or Thorne? Empire or revolution? Power or mercy? And then it struck her, the lie at the heart of both men. Croft spoke of order, Thorne of freedom. But both treated people like currency. Neither had asked what Ara wanted. Neither had seen her as anything but a weapon. Her voice came out low, cold as rain. I'm not going back, Elias. Not to Croft, not to Thorne. Tell him his family isn't his anymore. For a second silence. Then Elias's jaw tightened. He nodded once, a soldier receiving orders he hated. He lifted his hand. His men raised their weapons. Ara moved first. She hurled a flashbang Samira had cooked up from spare parts. The explosion of white light and thunderclap sound collapsed the world into chaos. Thorne's men staggered, blinded. Keller roared, charging. Malik fired clean bursts, dropping two. Ortiz dragged Samira clear as bullets shredded her table. Ara lunged for Elias. Not with her gun, with her hands. She slammed into him, driving them both into the concrete. His elbow clipped her cheek, stars bursting in her vision. They rolled, grappling. Years of Kaylin's lessons boiling down to raw survival. You're making a mistake, Elias snarled, straining for her wrist. Ara wrenched free, driving her knee into his chest. No, she hissed. I'm finally not. Her fist cracked against his jaw. He went limp, breath rasping through bloodied teeth. His men, disoriented, retreated, dragging their wounded. The warehouse fell quiet except for the wheeze of lungs and the drip of blood on concrete. Ara staggered to her feet, chest burning, Glock still in hand but lowered. Her team gathered, battered but alive. Keller bleeding from a graze, Malik limping, Ortiz's hands crimson, Samira pale but grinning, clutching her laptop like a trophy. We won? She asked. Ara looked at Elias sprawled on the floor, then at the broken window where Thorne's men had fled. Outside, the city's hum carried on, uncaring. No, Ara said softly. We survived. That's different. They patched, wounds in silence, the warehouse reeking of sweat, gunpowder, and victory too fragile to taste sweet. Ara stood apart, staring at the skyline. Croft would call soon, demanding answers. Thorne would send more men. The war wasn't over. It had only torn off its mask. But Ara felt something shift inside her, something that steadied her breathing and cleared the storm. For the first time, she wasn't caught between Croft and Thorne. She wasn't a pawn or a protege or a weapon someone else had forged. She was Ara Vance, leader of a ragged, stubborn band that had chosen her, not them. And that was enough to start rewriting the rules. The pigeons returned to the rafters as dawn broke, their wings fluttering like applause. Ara touched the locket at her chest, whispering to David's memory, to Kaylin's ghost, to the girl she used to be. I'm not theirs anymore, she said. I'm mine. Outside, the city blinked awake, restless and hungry. Inside, Ara's war had just begun, but now it was on her terms.